The decision to go camping in Blackwood Forest in late October of 2017 was, in hindsight, a cocktail of youthful overconfidence and a desperate need to escape the city's relentless hum. I had just gone through a rough breakup, and the idea of solitude amongst ancient trees, with only the crackle of a campfire for company, seemed like the perfect balm for a frayed soul. Blackwood had a reputation, of course. Local whispers of people getting lost, of strange sounds, of an unnerving stillness that settled after dark. But I was a seasoned camper, or so I thought, and dismissed them as campfire tales. I picked a spot deep within the forest, a good 2-hour hike from the nearest trail marker, wanting to be truly alone. The first day was idyllic. The autumn air was crisp, the leaves a vibrant tapestry of reds and golds, and the silence, when it came, was profound, broken only by the rustling of unseen creatures in the undergrowth or the distant caw of a crow. I set up my one-person tent, gathered firewood, and by the time dusk began to bleed through the canopy, I had a respectable fire going, its warmth a welcome defense against the encroaching chill. The first night was when things started to feel off. It was not one specific thing, but a collection of tiny, almost imperceptible shifts in the environment. The usual night sounds of the forest, the hooting of owls, the chirping of crickets, seemed muted, almost as if the woods were holding their breath. Around midnight, I was jolted awake by a sound. It was a whisper, too faint to make out words, but distinctly there, like dry leaves skittering across a stone, yet with a sibilant, almost human quality. I sat bolt upright in my sleeping bag, heart hammering against my ribs, straining my ears. Longer pause, build suspense. Silence. I told myself it was the wind, or an animal, my mind playing tricks on me in the unfamiliar dark, but the sound had felt too deliberate, too close. The next morning, I tried to shake off the unease. The sun, though weak, filtered through the trees, and the forest seemed normal again. I went for a long hike, exploring a nearby ridge, trying to convince myself that the previous night was just a product of an overactive imagination. It was when I returned to my campsite in the late afternoon that the real dread began to set in. Around the perimeter of my small clearing, someone, or something, had arranged small, smooth stones in a perfect circle. There were 7 of them, almost unnaturally uniform in size and color, placed with a precision that was deeply unsettling. I had not put them there. I had not even noticed stones like that in the immediate vicinity. A cold knot formed in my stomach. This was not the wind. This was not an animal. This was an act of intelligence, a clear sign that I was not alone, and that whatever shared this forest with me knew I was there. I immediately thought of packing up, of hiking out, even if it meant doing so in the fading light. But a stubborn, foolish part of me, the part that had sought solitude and prided itself on being unafraid, resisted. I told myself it was probably just some other hiker, a prankster, a very dedicated prankster to hike this far in.
That night, the whispering returned. Louder this time, more insistent. It seemed to come from multiple directions at once, a chorus of sibilant, indecipherable murmurs just beyond the reach of my campfire's light. The stones around my camp seemed to pulse in the flickering light, though I knew that had to be a trick of the eyes. Then came the tapping. A light, rhythmic tapping on the fabric of my tent, starting at the base and slowly, methodically moving upwards. Tap, tap, tap. My breath hitched. I clutched the small hatchet I kept for splitting kindling, its wooden handle slick with my sweat. I called out, "Who is there? This is not funny." My voice sounded pathetically small against the vast, indifferent darkness. The tapping stopped. The whispering ceased. For a long moment, the only sound was my own ragged breathing and the frantic thumping of my heart. Then, from the dense trees directly behind my tent, came a new sound, a low, guttural chuckle. It was not human. It was too resonant, too primal. And it was close, terrifyingly close. That was it for me. Adrenaline surged through my veins, obliterating any lingering bravado. I did not even bother to be quiet. I scrambled out of my tent, leaving everything behind except the clothes on my back and my flashlight, whose beam danced manically as I plunged into the darkness. I did not follow a trail. I just ran, blindly, desperately, away from that horrifying chuckle, away from the whispering pines and the circle of stones. Branches whipped at my face, roots threatened to trip me, but I did not dare slow down. The sounds seemed to follow me for a while, the whispers and an occasional chilling rustle in the leaves, just a little too loud, a little too synchronized with my panicked flight. I ran until I thought my lungs would burst, until the first gray light of dawn began to filter through the trees. I stumbled onto a marked trail, disoriented, scratched, and utterly terrified, but alive. I never went back for my gear. I reported the incident to a park ranger, who listened with a patient, slightly skeptical expression, mentioning that Blackwood had always been a place of strange occurrences, often attributed to disorientation or the power of suggestion in isolated individuals. I know what I heard. I know what I saw. It was not suggestion. It was not disorientation. There was something in Blackwood Forest, something intelligent and malevolent. Even now, years later, in the safety of my well-lit apartment, the memory of those whispering pines and that guttural chuckle can send a shiver. Pause, then deliver the final word with emphasis and a hint of coldness. Bing Lengde. I have not been camping since. Some sanctuaries are best left undisturbed.
My buddy Mark and I fancied ourselves amateur explorers, always looking for the next off-the-beaten-path adventure. So, in the spring of 2020, when the world was just starting to grapple with the pandemic and lockdowns were looming, we decided one last hurrah was in order: a 3-day camping trip into Rattlesnake Canyon. It was a remote, rugged area in the desert Southwest, known for its stark beauty, labyrinthine slot canyons, and, as the name suggested, a healthy population of rattlesnakes, though we were well prepped for that. What we were not prepared for was something far more unsettling. We drove for hours, the paved roads eventually giving way to dusty, rutted tracks. We parked Mark's Jeep near an old, abandoned mining trail, shouldered our packs, and began our trek into the canyon. The landscape was breathtaking: towering red rock formations, sparse, hardy vegetation, and an immense, almost oppressive silence. We planned to camp near a small, seasonal spring marked on an old map, hoping it still held water. After a challenging hike under the surprisingly intense spring sun, we found the spring. It was more of a seep, really, but there was enough clean water to see us through. We set up our small dome tent in a relatively flat area, nestled between a large boulder and the canyon wall. As evening approached, the temperature dropped significantly, and the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky with an incredible diamond-like clarity you only get in truly remote places. We built a small, contained fire, cooked our dehydrated meals, and talked about everything and nothing, feeling that unique sense of freedom that comes from being miles away from civilization. The first night was uneventful, save for the distant yip of a coyote and the scuttling of some small desert creature. It was the second day when things took a strange turn. We decided to explore a narrow slot canyon that branched off from the main gorge. The entrance was tight, requiring us to squeeze through in places, and the light inside was dim, filtered from far above. About half a mile in, the canyon opened into a slightly wider circular chamber. And in the center of that chamber, etched into the smooth sandstone floor, was a spiral symbol, at least 10 feet in diameter. It was not a natural formation. The lines were too precise, too deliberate. It looked ancient, yet there were no signs, no information about it on any of our maps or in any research we had done. "What do you make of that?" Mark asked, his voice echoing slightly in the confined space. I shook my head. No idea. Looks old, though. Really old. We took some pictures, a sense of unease starting to creep in. It felt like we had stumbled upon something sacred, or perhaps something forbidden. We did not linger, the quiet of the chamber suddenly feeling heavy. Back at our camp, the atmosphere was subdued. We kept glancing towards the dark mouth of the slot canyon, now a black gash in the twilight. Later that night, as we sat by the fire, we heard it. A sound that did not belong in the desert. It was a faint, melodic humming, almost like a chant, seeming to emanate from deep within the canyon walls. It was low, rhythmic, and deeply unsettling. It would rise and fall, sometimes fading away completely, only to return a few minutes later, a little closer, or perhaps from a slightly different direction. "Is that singing?" Mark whispered, his eyes wide. I strained to listen. "I do not know what it is," I replied, my own voice barely audible. "But it is not any animal I have ever heard." We doused our fire, plunging ourselves into darkness, hoping to hear better, or perhaps to be less conspicuous. The humming continued, an eerie, mournful sound that seemed to vibrate through the very rock around us. There were no words, just a series of drawn-out, resonant notes that sent shivers down my spine. We retreated into the tent, our bravado from the previous night completely gone. Sleep was impossible. The humming persisted for hours, sometimes sounding like it was just outside our tent, other times as if it were echoing from the depths of the earth itself. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The silence that followed was almost worse, thick with an unspoken dread. Sometime before dawn, I was startled awake by Mark grabbing my arm. "Dude, listen," he hissed. I held my breath, and then I heard it. A soft, rhythmic scraping sound, like something being dragged across rock, coming from the direction of the slot canyon entrance. Scrape. Pause. Scrape. Pause. It was getting closer. We lay there, paralyzed by fear, flashlights clutched in our hands, but too terrified to turn them on, too scared to see what was making that sound. The scraping came nearer and nearer, until it sounded like it was right outside our tent, just a few feet away. We could hear shallow, raspy breathing accompanying the scraping now. My mind conjured images of all sorts of horrors. Then a shadow fell across the thin fabric of the tent door, a tall, impossibly thin silhouette,
vaguely humanoid but distorted, elongated, its limbs seeming to bend at unnatural angles. It paused right in front of our tent for what felt like an eternity. We did not breathe. We did not move. I could feel the thumping of my own heart like a drum in the silent canyon. Then, as slowly as it had approached, the shadow moved away, the scraping sound receding back towards the slot canyon until it faded into the pre-dawn stillness. We did not speak until the sun was fully up, its harsh light a welcome relief. The area around our tent was undisturbed, no footprints other than our own. But the feeling of profound violation, of having been in the presence of something ancient and utterly alien, lingered. We packed our gear in record time, not even bothering with breakfast, our only thought to get out of Rattlesnake Canyon as fast as humanly possible. The hike out was a blur of anxiety, every shadow, every gust of wind making us jump. We never figured out what the spiral symbol meant, or what made those humming and scraping sounds, or what cast that terrifying shadow over our tent. We did not report it. Who would believe us? Sometimes I see that spiral in my dreams, and I hear that low, mournful hum. Rattlesnake Canyon holds its secrets well, and I, for one, have no desire to ever go back and try to uncover them. Some places are best left to the echoes and the shadows.
It was the summer of 2019, and my friends Liam, Sarah, and I decided a camping trip to Stillwater Creek was long overdue. It was a place we had frequented in our teens, a beautiful, relatively secluded spot known for its clear water and dense surrounding woods. We were older now, in our mid-20s, but the appeal of escaping for a weekend, sharing stories around a fire, and reliving some youthful adventures was strong. We packed up Liam's old pickup truck on a Friday afternoon, the mood light and full of anticipation. We arrived at Stillwater Creek as the sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. The usual campsites near the main access point were surprisingly empty, which we took as a good sign, more peace and quiet for us. We chose a familiar spot, a small clearing right by the creek, surrounded by a thick stand of hemlock and pine trees. Setting up camp was a well-rehearsed routine, Liam and I on tent duty, Sarah organizing the food and starting the fire. The first evening was perfect. We cooked sausages over the open flame, shared a few beers, and laughed until our sides ached. The creek gurgled nearby, a soothing soundtrack to our conversations. As the night deepened, a comfortable silence settled, punctuated only by the crackling fire and the distant croaking of frogs. It felt safe, familiar, nostalgic. The first hint that something was amiss came late that night. I had woken up needing to answer nature's call. The fire had died down to glowing embers, and the moon was hidden behind a thick blanket of clouds, making the darkness around our small camp almost absolute. I grabbed my flashlight and walked a short distance away from the tents towards the edge of the woods. As I stood there, a sudden, inexplicable feeling of being watched washed over me. It was a primal sensation, the kind that makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. I swept the beam of my flashlight across the tree line, half expecting to see the reflective eyes of a deer or a raccoon. Nothing, just the dense, dark woods staring back. I hurried back to the tent, chalking it up to the late hour and the inherent spookiness of being in the wilderness at night. The next day, we went for a hike along the creek. It was Sarah who noticed it first. "Guys, look at this," she said, her voice a little hushed. She was pointing to a series of crudely made wooden figures, almost like small stickmen effigies, stuck into the ground along the less traveled bank of the creek, facing the water. There were about 5 or 6 of them, each about a foot tall. They had not been there on our previous trips, years ago. They looked weathered, but not ancient. Creepy, Liam muttered, kicking one lightly with his boot. But there was an unsettling deliberateness to their placement, and none of us felt like lingering. That evening, as we sat around the fire, the atmosphere felt different. The easy camaraderie of the previous night was replaced by a subtle tension. Every snap of a twig in the woods, every rustle of leaves made us jump. Liam tried to lighten the mood with jokes, but they fell flat. Around 10 p.m., Sarah, who was facing the woods opposite the creek, suddenly gasped, her eyes wide. "There is someone there," she whispered, pointing. "I saw someone standing just inside the trees, watching us." Liam and I grabbed our most powerful flashlights and aimed them where she had indicated. The beams cut through the darkness, illuminating the dense undergrowth and the tall, silent trees. We saw nothing. "Are you sure, Sarah?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. It was probably just a shadow, the firelight playing tricks. She shook her head, her face pale. "No, it was a person, tall, just standing there, and then it was gone." We spent the next hour on high alert, scanning the woods, our conversation reduced to nervous whispers. The feeling of being watched was palpable now, a heavy blanket pressing in on us from the surrounding darkness. We decided to call it a night early, hoping to feel safer in our tents. Liam and I shared one tent, Sarah the other. Before zipping up, Liam stuck his head out. "You know," he said, his voice low, "I do not think we are the only ones who thought this spot was too good to pass up tonight." Deep night. Tone becomes very tense, filled with dread and fear. Sleep was elusive. Every sound from outside was magnified, analyzed, feared. Hushed, sharp fear. Sometime deep in the night, I heard a distinct footstep just outside our tent. A heavy, deliberate tread on the soft earth. Not an animal. Liam heard it too. I felt him tense beside me. We lay there frozen, listening. More footsteps, slowly circling the tent. Then a low scraping sound against the nylon, as if something or someone was dragging a finger or a stick along the side. My heart was in my throat. Liam fumbled for the heavy-duty flashlight, his hand shaking. He unzipped the tent flap a fraction of an inch and peered out. After a moment, he pulled back, his face ashen. "There is nothing there now," he whispered, "but the zipper on Sarah's tent, it is partly open." We both knew Sarah would never leave her tent unzipped, not even a little. We called out her name, softly at first, then louder. No response. Panic flared. Liam ripped open our tent and we scrambled out, our flashlights cutting frantic arcs in the darkness. We rushed to Sarah's tent. The zipper was indeed open about a foot from the top. Liam tore it the rest of the way down and shone his light inside. The tent was empty. Her sleeping bag was there, looking like she had just slipped out of it, but Sarah was gone. We screamed her name, our voices raw with terror, the sound swallowed by the indifferent woods. We searched frantically around the campsite, our beams of light crossing frantic arcs, finding nothing but the disturbing stick figures by the creek, which now seemed to leer at us in the wavering light. There were no signs of a struggle, no tracks other than our own. It was as if she had simply vanished. We had no choice but to wait for daylight, a torturous, fear-filled vigil. As soon as the sun rose, we packed what we could, leaving Sarah's things, and hiked out as fast as our legs could carry us, heading straight for the ranger station. The search for Sarah went on for weeks. They found nothing, no trace. The official theory was that she had wandered off, perhaps disoriented, and succumbed to the elements or an accident. But Liam and I knew better. We knew about the stick figures, the feeling of being watched, the figure Sarah had seen, the footsteps, the open zipper. We told the rangers everything, but it was clear they thought we were either hysterical or hiding something. It has been years. Liam and I rarely talk about that night anymore. The memory is too painful, too terrifying. Stillwater Creek is a place we will never return to. Sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet, I think I hear a faint scraping sound, or feel that prickling sensation of being watched. And I wonder about the watcher on Stillwater Creek, and what became of Sarah. The woods keep their secrets, and some are too horrifying to comprehend.